Uy, espera. Ok, bueno, worst it's okay. Hello, everybody. I think we should be live in a set right now, or am I not doing it correct? Because I must have made it here. Or is this one? Okay, let me see. Let me see if we're in now I have clicked on something that I might not have to have clicked. So let me see from the LinkedIn page if we are live streaming already here, because I cannot see it at this moment. Okay. Yes, we're streaming live. Well, thanks everybody for being here. I was just checking one technical thing. So welcome to today's episode of Emerging Minds. Emerging Minds is the thought leadership forum that we are bringing you in BureauWorks. And today I am beyond thrilled. I have invited one of my favorite authors, one of my favorite leaders that came out of our industry. She's not there anymore, right? Who is Minette Norman. So without further ado, I would like you to introduce yourself, Minette, for those who still don't know you.
Thank you for inviting me, Javi. So I am Minette Norman. I'm based in the San Francisco Bay Area. And before becoming a consultant and an author and a speaker, I spent 30 years in the software industry. And I started out in 1989. I worked at Adobe when they were working on Photoshop 1.0. I wrote the Photoshop 1.0 tutorial. And then I got into I did tech writing for about 10 years. And then I got into management and I started managing tech writers. And then I made that leap into the wonderful world of localization, which is your world. And I know a lot of the listeners' world. And I spent quite a few years in localization and I ended up leading localization for Autodesk. And then I made a bigger leap. And that leap was I became VP of engineering practice at Autodesk. And I did that role for about 5 years. And in that time, I was driving very large scale change that seemed like it was technology change, but it was really culture change. And I got very interested in how humans interact in the workplace and leadership and better leadership and seeing that people aren't very well trained to lead, including me. I had to learn everything on the job. And I ultimately, in 2019, left the industry, decided to start my own thing, and wrote a book, co-wrote another book, and now I do a lot of speaking and consulting engagements to help leaders be more inclusive and create the conditions where everyone can fully contribute and do their best work.
I love it. You know what I love about you on top of that, Minette, is your energy and passion. That's not so common to find people that you listen to and you feel that people are passionate. That's something that you have, and I am thankful for that. So, well,
yeah, no, there's no stopping my passion. It's really true. I feel like, it's funny because a lot of people thought that when I left the tech industry, I would retire because I'd had such a long career. But I realized I have way too much energy. I have way too much accumulated wisdom and knowledge, and I am not done.
That's great. I prepared a few questions that I wanted to ask you today because for those who are following us, Minette is on top of a leader, is a great book writer. You put on together like 2 or 3 books, correct? How many did you put? How many did you write? Two already.
I wrote The Boldly Inclusive Leader, which just came out in August. And before that, I co-wrote the Psychological Safety Playbook with Caroline Helbig.
Okay. Today, I read your book, and today I prepared a few questions on the last book, on Bold Inclusive Leaders. I have a few questions on that as well. So when I was preparing to do this interview to you, the first thing that came to mind was asking you about inspiration. Like, you're one day there, what inspired you to delve into that topic, to write The Bold Inclusive Leader?
The funny thing about that, I'm glad you asked that question, is I was already thinking about it when I was still in tech, when I was at Autodesk. And what inspired me was, I had reached this level of leadership. I was a VP. I worked for SVPs. I worked a lot with the C staff. And I realized most of us are very ill prepared to lead inclusive teams. And what I mean by that, and I certainly felt this even when I was in localization, I'm suddenly leading a very global team. I had had no real training in what does it mean to lead a multicultural team? How do you lead people from different cultures? How do you make sure that, for example, if I am based in the US, that my employees all over the world feel that they have a voice, that they can fully contribute? And I realized I didn't know how to do it, but neither did anyone around me. And most people, honestly, did it quite poorly. And this is how I came to focus on writing this book. I remember sitting in staff meetings when I was a VP and feeling like I'm not really part of the inside club. There's an insiders club here and there's everybody else. And I'm in the everybody else category. And I feel like I'm a second class citizen and it shouldn't be that way. And I want to help leaders do better. So I actually outlined the book back in like 2019 when I was still at Autodesk. But I wasn't ready to write it until a bit later. But I thought about it because I felt like I feel like we can help leaders do better earlier in their careers, because I feel like I learned it quite late in my career.
It resonates a lot with being a parent. There's so many books out there, but nobody really has the book to be a proper parent, right? So you're doing your part in this regard. I love it. And I thought as well of after asking you for the inspiration of the book, like because the title is extremely indicative, and I love it. It's about being bold in inclusive, right? So, in your view, what does it mean to be bold, inclusive leader, and how does this concept differ from the traditional leadership approaches that we've seen so far?
Well, I think traditionally what we've seen in leadership is this, and we've all heard it, of course, this old command and control style of leadership that has been with us for a really long time, where the leader has all the power, the leader has all the answers, and there's this very separate hierarchy of leaders and everybody else. And I think that's the model that I'm trying to challenge, because I think in today's day and age, everyone has something to contribute, and leaders cannot possibly know everything or have all the answers. And so what a boldly inclusive leader is to me is someone who shows up. Obviously, if you get to a level of leadership, you have some experience, you have some expertise, you have some background. And at the same time, you are an imperfect human being like everybody else on this planet. And that you show up open-minded, curious to learn from others, knowing that you do not have all the answers. And the best way to get to great business results and innovation is to invite everyone to fully contribute. So you have to be open-minded. You have to be willing to listen to people who challenge you. And, it has been so hard traditionally to challenge the status quo. And it's been often career limiting for people. And I think we all need to challenge the status quo today, because the status quo is not working for many of us, for many people in the world and in the workplace. And the reason I use the word boldly in the title is because I think a lot of leaders go tentatively into, especially when we start to talk about like diversity, equity, and inclusion, can be very intimidating, and leaders get scared that they're going to do the wrong thing. And so they're hesitant. They're like, oh, we're only going to do this little thing. And I think we have to challenge that and be bold and go all in. Because if you look even, and I don't want to talk about just demographics, but even if you look at demographics of people in leadership, people who are truly getting the power, it hasn't changed significantly. It's starting to change, but the progress is too slow. And so I think we have to boldly go and say, the status quo isn't working. Let's really change that.
I love what you say. I was writing this morning a post on LinkedIn, and I was thinking about my first experience of leadership, the first idea of a leader. I'm a big football fan. What in America is called soccer. And for me, I was born in the 80s. So for me, growing up in the 90s, the first idea of leadership was the football trainer, right? And how they used to have all the solutions, how they used to be the one and only light to follow, and how that's changing. And I think that idea is, as you say, evolving, but it really takes a lot of time. So I think with this little piece of drops of rain and your 5 cents, we can all collaborate, and we should, right? So and I was thinking as well, in your personal leadership journey, would you mind sharing with the friends watching today a pivotal moment in your career in which your perspective on leadership changed, evolved, and to champion inclusivity?
I think it happened for me when I was leading a very it was when it started in localization when I started leading very international multicultural teams, and I realized I have so much to learn. But I tell you a really pivotal moment for me, because I thought I had come so far. I thought I am truly open to other perspectives. I am interested in different cultures, and I'm open-minded. And I was having a staff meeting in the US. My team was very global. They had come in from different countries around the world. We were having a staff meeting, and it was a couple days. And so we had a social hour before a dinner one evening. And I thought that this was going to be great for everyone to mingle and mix and get to know each other. And then after the meeting, it was only after the meeting, I was having one-on-ones with my staff. And one of my staff members was based in Shanghai. And I was having my one-on-one, and I said, "How did you think this staff meeting went? Do you have any feedback?" And he said, "It was great. The meetings were great." He said, "I had a problem. It was really hard for me during the social time, because all of the conversation was about American TV and movies and sports and music and cultural references that I just didn't know, and I couldn't participate. So I felt kind of awkward." And honestly, Javi, it seems like a little thing, but it was pivotal for me, because I think I'm being inclusive, and I inadvertently didn't set up the conditions here for someone to feel included, and they felt bad. And I need to be much more aware of what are people experiencing that I don't see. And the only way we can know that is to ask them and get better, and of course I can apologize, but then what am I going to do next time to make sure everyone can fully participate? And it really changed the way I ran things. I remember the next time we did something together, instead of having this unstructured thing, we're like, let's actually do an activity together where everyone feels that they have basically a level playing field. We cooked together the next time, something like that, where it's not like you have to be American or you have to be from Europe, whatever it is. Everyone felt like, okay, we all cook in the world, and so let's do this.
Well, and Chinese food from Shanghai is one of the best. So that would
Exactly.
I guess that was a great experience as well.
It's just an example, but it was eye-opening for me, I would say. Yeah.
It's those small moments, right, that change things. There's always something small that happens that makes you trigger something, right? It's a meeting, a relationship, somebody that you meet. But I guess that's very interesting, right? And in that journey of yours, I'm sure you overcame a lot of challenges. I think that really fostering inclusivity in groups, in teams, really definitely poses some challenges, right? And I thought it would be good for our listeners to if you could share an experience where you encounter resistance and obstacles in promoting diversity, and if you can share with us an example on how you navigated through it.
Oh, so many. I mean, really so many. And I still encounter them in the work that I'm doing with clients as well, because there is this resistance often of like, we're moving too quickly. We need to slow down. Right. And so I remember, like, I'm just trying to think of a couple of things where I encountered resistance. Okay, here's one.
Okay.
When I was at Autodesk, we had something called the Software Architects Forum. And as you probably know, many of you know, software architects are considered like the creme de la creme, the top of the heap, sort of in the hierarchy of being very technical. And because I was the head of engineering, I would host this software architects forum. And the first time I went there were like maybe close to 100 people. There was one woman who was a software architect. One woman out of 100. And, the percentages of women in engineering were closer to 25, 30%. They weren't great, but they were not 1%, right? So I started asking the question, what is happening here? That let's say we have 30% women in engineering, but by the time you get to this high technical level of software architect, it's 1%. What is happening? Well, bias has to be at play. It's not that the women are not technical enough. It's clearly that they're not getting mentoring, they're not getting sponsorship, they're not having opportunities, or maybe they don't want to be an architect because they think that I'm not going to feel included in this all male environment. So I started challenging that. I started bringing it up publicly at the forum. I started working with the HR team to actually like benchmark the job and how could we do better. And I got hit with so much resistance. Not that they didn't want it, because I think the men certainly recognized this is not right, but that no one was willing to do the hard work of like, how are we going to actually identify the women who may be earlier in their careers and then help them progress to this level of software architect? I don't even know where it stands. Like, obviously I left the company 4 years ago. Maybe it's evolved since then. I don't have any intel on it. It was super frustrating because I think I went to 4 or 5 of those forums, and there were at the end maybe 2 or 3 women as opposed to 1. But I just felt like this has got to change, and we have to question everything we're doing, because it's going to take another 100 years before we get to some kind of equity here. So that was just one of many examples.
Wow, that's hardcore. And thankfully, in the industry, in the localization and globalization industry, we have organizations like Women in Localization who are helping to do that, for example, right? I know you're a member there too. I saw you last year in the 15th anniversary celebration a couple of months ago in California. So we need to do more. But well, thanks for putting out that example. And here, look, there's a question from our friend Catel, who is Catel is asking Minette, a lot of corporations have inclusion at the core of their values, at least on paper, which, that's very true. What are typically the type of shortcomings you're seeing in organizations that prevent them from really embracing inclusion? I think that's a very interesting question.
Oh, I think it's a great question. Thank you for that, Catel. Well, this is going to be my perspective because that's all I can offer on it. What I think there are many things that get in the way. And one of them is that most companies that I have seen, they put it on paper. They say, these are our values. We really care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They focus often on hiring. They focus on the demographics. They say, we now have 40% women in leadership. We now have this many Black and Latinx and Asian employees, et cetera. And they really look at metrics, but they do not go deep enough on what does it take to create an inclusive culture where this diverse group of people that we have gone to all the trouble to hire can feel that they can fully participate and belong and feel included. This is my take on it. We often think about things like culture and inclusion as nice to haves. And then the focus is on the business results, and especially in public companies, like what are we reporting to the shareholders every quarter? And everything that relates to culture, which includes DEI and inclusion specifically here, gets put off as a nice to have that we'll work on when we have some cycles and we have some time. And I think that we are never going to solve these problems unless we realize that an inclusive culture, and there's lots of evidence to back this up, an inclusive culture will give us better business results. An inclusive culture will result in more innovation. An inclusive culture will help us solve these gnarly, complex problems that we are trying to solve as a business. And we cannot put it off to the side. We need to incorporate it into every business decision, every strategy, every policy. And leaders have to take on, this is one of the reasons I wrote my book, leaders need to take on head on, how am I showing up every day? How am I creating that inclusive culture or not? And I think people are not investing in it and seeing it as a nice to have instead of a business imperative. And I'm trying to change that mentality. So I believe, I'm with you, Catel. I think it's a problem that many companies are paying lip service to inclusion and not doing the work. And I have to admit, it takes work. But it doesn't have to be super time consuming. It has to be embedded in everything else that we do.
Yeah. Well, I hope that answers the question, Catel. Thanks for that. Thanks for that. She's saying now 100% inclusion has to come first in order to be diverse. Yeah. And you go, please go.
No, I was just going to say, sorry, I was just going to reiterate that. I completely agree. I think we get it backwards. We sometimes think about diversity first and then inclusion. And I think we have to work on that culture of inclusion, and then we will get to a more diverse workforce. So couldn't agree more.
And I have a question that it's very linked to what we're discussing now. And it's about the measuring of the success in inclusion, right? Especially in our industry or in a data-driven world as the one we're working in. What metrics or indicators do you consider when assessing the success of a bold inclusivity initiative within an organization? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, and of course, the metrics that people usually share are the demographics, as I just said, like what percentage of our workforce is women, et cetera, people of color, whatever. And I think those those metrics are only the starting point. To talk about how do we measure inclusion, of course, is complex, right? Because it is not just an easy number to quantify, and there's a lot of qualitative measures behind that. And so I think we have to be strategic in how we look at quantifying and measuring inclusion. And we have to ask in whatever pulse surveys or surveys that we do of our employees, we have to ask very pointed questions about how people are experiencing work and how do they feel if they are heard and seen and valued, and can they do their fully best work, and what's preventing that. So I think we have to ask. There's some other interesting metrics that you could look at, which is, of course, retention and retention of underrepresented populations in the company. I think that's an important one to look at. So not just what are your demographics, but who is leaving. And if you're seeing that it is people from the underrepresented groups that are leaving in a higher percentage than the majority group, then you probably have an inclusion problem. If you are having a large number of employee complaints, for example, about behavior, about bullying, about microaggressions, how are these things being handled and how are they being resolved? And if they're being resolved most frequently as this was not a serious matter and there's no follow-up, that is a problem. That is definitely something to pay attention to, versus there were actions taken to remedy whatever it was, a harassment, a bullying, microaggressions. We have to see how these things are being resolved. There was a very interesting article that Lily Zhang is a fabulous writer. They wrote DEI Deconstructed. They have a new book here called Reconstructing DEI. And they wrote an HBR article about measuring DEI. And I would encourage people to look for that from Lily Zhang. And they had some very good ideas about how do we measure the effectiveness of our DEI program. So I don't remember all of the things that they mentioned, but one of them was like, how are these employee complaints being reconciled? And that can be a really big indicator of inclusion and equity.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I would like to ask you for a practical advice for leaders or those who aim at being leaders. What practical steps or strategies would you recommend that they start implementing within their teams to be more inclusively minded?
Well, let me think. I have to walk all the way through my book chapter by chapter. I'm just going to pull because that's what I hope the book really tries to do, is to give you ideas.
But we can leave a link here on the Amazon if you want for people to
Sure.
go check it as well.
Everyone is welcome to read the book. That would be great. Let me give you a few. I'm going to give you a few ideas because of time. One of the things that I say both in the book and in general in my work is that leaders have to start with themselves and their own behavior. How are they showing up every day? So before we think about how do we create an inclusive culture, how do we change the behavioral norms everywhere in the organization, we as leaders need to start with ourselves. How do we listen? Are we really listening to everyone in our team? Or are we favoring the loudest voices? Are we favoring the proximity bias of someone's in the same office with me here in San Francisco, and I'm not really going to pay attention to you, Javi, you're over right now in Lisbon, and I've got someone in Shanghai, and I'm not paying attention to them as much as the people that are in the room with me. That's something we have to counter, and we have to say, how do I listen? And listen, I mean, how do we create also opportunities to hear from everybody, no matter who they are, no matter where they are in the world? So that's part one, is like, how am I showing up? And then one of the things I also think is important is not just how we listen, but what do we reward? Like, what do we think is worth celebrating? And are we rewarding only the people who agree with us and who are just like us? Or are we also rewarding the people who may challenge us, who may say, I see things from a different perspective? We as inclusive leaders have to reward everyone equitably. And what we instinctively do, because this is just our natural bias, is we reward or pay attention to the people who agree with us or who are most like us. So we need to challenge that inherent bias there. And then, of course,
that's amazing that you said this. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. And I am one of those that, by nature, you tend to be more friends with those who think like you, right?
Yes, of course.
It's so challenging. I agree. I can agree with more with you, Neda. So
Well, you know,
yeah,
the thing about that, and so you don't feel bad about yourself for that because we're all like that. That is how we're wired as human beings. Like as a species, you know, from an evolutionary perspective, we have evolved to live in groups and communities of people like us. So
yeah.
that's basically our affinity bias that is wired into us. And so
Okay.
we as leaders, though, this is where to be an inclusive leader, we have to constantly challenge that bias, that affinity bias of like, I'm comfortable with the people just like me. I'm comfortable. I like-minded people. And instead, we might need to hire someone who makes us a little bit uncomfortable because we need someone who thinks really differently. And that can be very hard for us, right?
At any time of your career, at the beginning, at the end, or what time would you recommend? Because I see myself, I just turned 40, 41 in a couple of weeks. I am not the same as I was when I was 25. And I
Right.
love to be, like, I look back now, and one of the best leaders I had was my first boss who taught me a lot of things, confronted me a lot of times, and it was the very beginning. Is it so easy to accept confrontation as we move along our career line, in our leadership line? What do you think?
Well, that's so interesting. I don't even know if it has to do with where we are on the journey of our
Yeah.
career as it does as like how open-minded we are. So I think, and how much sort of a growth mindset, like, can I hear feedback or can I hear a different perspective? I certainly have gotten much better at that the older I've gotten, which is interesting because I think I was looking back on my career and I feel like when I was 30 years old, I thought I knew everything. Whereas I'm 63 now and I think I know very little. I have so much still to learn. So I feel like I
I
have
love it.
gotten more open-minded, but maybe that's just the journey that I'm on. I don't know if that's true for everyone. I think it really matters also who is delivering how someone is delivering their idea. Like, are they attacking you? Because if they're
Oh
attacking
yeah.
your ideas, you're naturally going to get defensive. But if someone is sharing an idea that's just different from yours, can you listen with curiosity? And that's what I talk about a lot for leaders is like, you don't have to agree with the other person. In fact, it's good if we don't agree. It's good to have different perspectives. But what we do need to do is have the curiosity to listen to someone else's
Hmm.
perspective. And that takes practice because it's so easy for us to get defensive and just shut down and try to prove them wrong, right?
Yeah, yeah. You're so right. It's all about open mindedness. It's more. It's gonna be on that part, right? I thought of asking you one thing as well, and I want to hear your opinion in when you're being a bold, inclusive leader. And I mean, our leaders, I think we want them to be able to always take decisions, be great at decision making if that's possible, right? So how do you approach the decision making processes to ensure that diverse voices are always heard and considered as a bold, inclusive leader?
That's a super important point, and I just did a workshop this week, earlier in the week, and decision making came up because we were talking about psychological safety and creating the conditions where everyone can speak up, and the leader that came to me afterwards with a question said, "How do you balance timely decision making with hearing all the voices? Because we seem to get caught up in this endless stream of let's keep hearing from more people, but we don't take decisions." And so what I think we all need to get better at, and I wasn't always great at this either. I feel like I learned over time, is that leaders need to make decisions and they need to make the most informed decision they can, which means they need to solicit a diversity of ideas. So I think it's important when you're trying to make a decision is first of all, define who is the decision maker or is it a group and how will you make the decision? And many decisions are made consultatively. Like we try to get a diversity of perspectives, and then ultimately there's one leader who has to make the final decision. So in that period of consulting, you want to make sure that you are getting different perspectives. So one question to ask is who is missing from this decision making? Either what demographic, what perspective, what geography, what culture, whatever it is, who are we not considering? Invite them into the conversation. And at the same time, leaders are often under a lot of time pressure, and I recognize this. So we have to time box decisions. So maybe we have 2 weeks, maybe we have a month, maybe we have a few days. How do we, in that time period that we have, How do we hear from as many voices as possible while still making a timely decision? And I will never forget I'll tell you it was an anecdote from my days in localization. It was my first job in localization. And it was back in the days when we were early adopters of World Server. So Autodesk had this huge implementation of World Server. And we had just done an upgrade, and it was always a big deal to do an upgrade. And so we did the upgrade. We had tested it for months. We rolled it out. I come into work in the morning, and the writers in Europe have already reported bugs in the rollout. And it was a huge bug. The bug was that writers could not input a graphic into their documentation. So it was a massive bug. So I was the leader of the group, and I had basically a decision to make, which is, do we roll back to the previous version, which then meant that it was going to be months of testing again, or do we take a software fix that Idiom had already figured out? So I'll never forget this, because I literally, rather than having days, weeks, or months, I had about 2 hours in which I had to make this decision of either take a bug fix or go back. And so what did I do? I got everyone I could think of on the call. We had all the Idiom leadership team and engineers. We had all of my engineers, and I think we maybe have had a writer. I don't remember who we had on, but we had a big group, and we went around the table with what are the pros and cons of making this decision one way or the other. And the software engineer whose bug it was told me it was it was one line of code. And so I remember sitting there in silence, terrified of making the wrong decision. But I realized I had gotten all the input I could, and this was the right group of people. We had a lot of different perspectives, and now I need to make the decision. And I said, we're going to take your bug fix. We're going to do some quick testing. And luckily it turned out it worked. It was fine. We went forward. Terrifying moment as a leader, but I did what I could to get a diversity of perspectives and then make that decision. So hopefully most of you are not in that situation, but I think that's what we have to do.
Yeah, and we're far beyond the time of servers as well.
Thank goodness. that was like back in, I think that was like 2005 or something like that. But those were challenging days. Yeah.
Not that long ago. And I have a question as well. I mean, I wanted to ask you as well about the constant evolving landscape and the future of leadership, right? Where do you see the future of leadership heading, particularly in this context we're speaking, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion. And here's my thing, like I see it in the following way. I'm European, I live in Europe, I work with America and Americans all the time. And I think for some reason that is way more advanced in American companies rather than here in Europe. What do you think? Where's the future of this going? Is it going to be a global expansion, or how do you see the future of all these?
Oh, I'm curious to know. I want to actually come back to you in a minute, but I'll share what I think of the future of leadership. I think, especially in this world of talking about AI taking everything over and that everything is automated and everything is artificial intelligence, I think that the future of leadership is more human than ever. I think we need more human leadership, more inclusive leadership than ever, because of this rapidly advancing technology. I think we have to counter that by not having the command and control leaders who know everything, but instead the very human leaders who bring in diverse teams and diverse voices and really embrace that we need everyone to solve these problems. And when you look at, for example, when you look at AI and you look at the need for ethical AI, and we look at, obviously the training data that has gone into so many of these models that is highly biased. How do we overcome the bias that is already in the data? And that's only going to happen if we bring in diverse teams of people who are going to challenge, like, you remember these early models where they had never been trained on anything other than a white man, and they couldn't recognize, for example, a black face. How could that ever happen? Well, probably the people who designed it didn't think of anyone except themselves in that training data. So this kind of stuff requires, I think, a really new model of leadership. And so that's why I am promoting the human leader who is inclusive to a diversity of talent around them. I'm curious about what you said, though, what the US you felt was ahead of Europe on this?
Yes,
specifically on leadership?
I have this feeling. It's not that there's an example, but I think it's like more what I wrote about today. Like I don't know, for some reason, like we always think because we're fortunate to have to work and to be working in the tech side of the world, right? Silicon Valley, but I think we are leading that sort of revolution, which still hasn't come to the regular shop here or bar who has like 4 employees and stuff like that. So that's what popped into my mind, right? Like, we're lucky because we are working in this big corporate that have all this ruling and stuff, but how can we transmit that idea to those smaller businesses or I don't know, or I don't know, that whatever kind of company that is more regular, more day to day, like somebody that is selling milk, something like that. That's what I thought of, right? Like, how do we do this? Because, as I said, I think we're privileged to be working in this very global environment, which we are leading to do this. But that was my thought. That was my thought.
It's interesting.
I don't know if there's even an answer to that. It's like, hey,
I don't think there's certainly not an easy answer.
Yes.
But what I will tell you, I mean, I think there's also truth to the larger organizations office maybe have seen this more, and the smaller ones feel like, well, we just are scrappy. We have to get by with what we have. And then it's only later that they see the problems that have emerged. For example, even with like a startup that turns out to be all men. And then they go, oops, we don't have any women, right? And now what do we do? That sort of thing. So I think that's interesting. But what I have seen that I found quite surprising in a way is how many different industries and different places in the world have reached out to say, I want to do some work on psychological safety and inclusion. And it's been wonderful for me to see that. It's not, I thought it was, I certainly thought the only people that are going to hire me are from the tech industry because that's my background. But I've been doing work with, totally different industries, different geos. Just this week, I was working with a local government. You don't think about like small county government, like that they're going to be focused on creating an inclusive workplace, but they were so open and so interested in that. I'm like, okay, this is giving me some hope.
So I guess it's just time that we need, right? At the end, we just need time and keep working there, right?
Yeah.
Hey, Minette, one of the things, and I mentioned before, is about my first boss. And I always talk about him because he's one of my best mentors. I have mentors from the industry as well. And one of the things that I love the most is go and listen to opinions before I form my mind. And I want to ask you a question about mentorship and your own mentorship, right? Because I believe that throughout your career, you've had mentors who played a significant role in shaping your leadership philosophy, right? So how has mentorship contributed to your understanding of inclusive leadership, if that ever happened, or something that you create on your own?
Well, I have to tell you that for most of my career, I did not have any mentors. I had managers, and some of them were good and some of them were not good. So I didn't have formal mentors until quite late in my career. And so instead of having mentors, what I did was I watched the behavior of the leaders, both my leaders and the ones around me. And I sort of learned what I respected and what I wanted to emulate. And also a lot of what I did not want to emulate, a lot of bad behavior. And that was a lot of what informed. I do not want to shut down people's voices. I do not want to favor all of my buddies, which I saw a lot of. So I had some bad, I would say, like bad examples that I tried not to emulate, and some good examples of leaders who I thought had great qualities. Then later in my career, I was assigned a mentor. I remember it was when Autodesk was trying to get more women beyond the director level because women were getting stuck at the director level, and we had almost no VPs and SVPs who were women. So I was assigned a mentor who was an SVP. I was a director. I think it was when I was leading localization. And he gave me a lot of lessons in what not to do. He told me that he would not take a meeting with me unless I was his mentee because I would have to prove that I was relevant to him.
How important is having good and bad bosses at the same time.
Exactly.
I remember having a terrible boss years ago who, oh my God. And then I remember having good bosses. And how important that is for one's career, right? And for one's, idea of leadership and
totally.
To be where it's right.
Totally. That was a lesson for me. Like him saying, I wouldn't take a meeting with you because you weren't relevant. I went the opposite way. And I basically, as a leader, decided anyone can set up a meeting with me. I want to talk to everyone. I want to hear from everyone. And that, honestly, that helped me form who I wanted to be as a leader. And that the other thing, that because I didn't have great mentors, I decided I wanted to be the most generous mentor I could ever be. And so, actually, quite
Yeah.
early in my career, I offered myself as a mentor, and I've mentored and mentored and mentored over the years. And it's very funny. A couple of the people that I used to mentor when I was at Autodesk still reach out to me, even though we haven't
Yeah.
worked together for years. And I feel like those relationships are precious. And I wish I had had better mentors, and I want to be a generous mentor for the rest of my life, because I think it's so important.
That's I don't live in my city for the last 15 years, and this boss I'm referring to, I go to see him every time I
Still.
go there. I try to grab lunch with him anytime I see him. He told me last time I saw him, Javier, I remember the day you entered this door. I was 27 years old, 26 years old, and now you entering now. I would have signed to see you where you are. I was like, oh, I shed a tear for that. So that's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Well, the importance of and yeah, and that, I wanted to reflect on that, right? And I don't want to take much more, but I have another couple of questions, my dear Minette. And
Mhm.
I thought of asking you as well about, continuous learning, right? Because in leadership, I think a lot of the things we said, you learn it by doing, by committing mistakes, by standing up on your feet again and say, hey, let's continue this. So in such a rapidly evolving landscape of leadership, and with those ideas you're promoting with your books and the way you're leading, can you share with us how do you stay informed and continuously educate yourself to approach new challenges and opportunities?
Yes, and I think that continuous learning is what keeps us going, what keeps us vital, what keeps us engaged. I'm constantly looking for new sources of material. So I read a ton. I honestly, I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn, because there's so many thought leaders that I can learn from on LinkedIn, and I follow them. I follow their work. I read their articles. I read their books. I also have an amazing network, and I think that one cannot underestimate the power of having a network. I cultivated a network back when I was still in tech. Like, I have people that I know in companies all over. Now I have this amazing network of other consultants and authors and speakers that I can go to for help, because especially now I'm on my own. I'm a solopreneur, and it can feel very lonely, but I have people that I can reach out to. And so I'm
Yeah,
always, if I'm stuck on something, I will call someone up, I will reach out, I will read something. And I think that's what keeps me fresh. Like, definitely, especially as we talk about topics of leadership and inclusion and diversity and equity, knowledge is evolving so rapidly. And even like what I was learning 5 years ago has changed. And so I just have to keep up and keep staying curious, and not feeling like I've got it all. I know it all, because I will never know it all. None of us will ever know it all. But just staying open-minded. And also, when, sometimes I'll get a question, like I'll be in a keynote or a workshop, and I'll get a question, and I don't have a great answer to it, because it's just out of my area of expertise. And then I
yeah.
admit it. I'm like, you know what? This is not something I feel that I can answer very knowledgeably. And that's obviously something I need to learn more about, and to be okay
Yeah.
with admitting that.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I always try to promote also the idea of vulnerability as a leader, as a person, and
Yeah.
that you mentioned this now. It's very interesting, and I thank you for mentioning that as well. Right? We're all humans. We all make mistakes. We all need to be informed. We all should show ourselves vulnerable as well. Like, I really appreciate that you mentioned that. I mean it. And I have only one thing. You mentioned that you're 63 years young now, so I want to ask you, you still have a long career ahead of you, but as you reflect on your career, what legacy do you hope to leave behind as a leader, particularly
Mm.
in the realm of promoting bold inclusivity?
Oh, that's a lovely question. Yeah, I hope that my legacy is that, first of all, when I was as a leader, that I empowered people to thrive and really find their strengths and do great work. And that's what I hope I did when I was leading teams. And now, in this phase of my career where I'm helping other leaders, I hope that I leave a legacy of a whole new generation of leaders, a whole new world of leadership that challenges the old models and that creates workplaces where everyone can thrive and where everyone feels that they can show up as themselves at work and that they are seen and heard and valued for who they are. That's the legacy I would love to leave.
I really love that. I really love that. I really love it. I hope I can contribute with this because when I first spoke to you, I am a big fan of yours, and I said like I would like to introduce you to the people that are watching, to the people that follow me, follow my post, because your ideas are super worth sharing and super worth building around. So thank you very much, Minette. Just want to tell you if you have any closing remarks, if you want to recommend a few books, some people that you follow for our audience to follow too. Of course, everyone go and buy her book as well. I bought the audiobook, so
Oh, fantastic. And I read the audiobook, so you get to hear my voice if you like that.
yeah, yeah.
Closing words. So I would say that no matter where you are in your journey of leadership, you have a role to play and that you have an impact on the people around you every single day. And whether you're a CEO or you're a first line manager or you're an individual contributor, you can change someone's experience in the workplace for better or for worse. And so let's make it for better. And be an ally, be a listener, be someone who will stand up when there are injustices and speak up and do the right thing. And then if you want to, I'm just thinking about all the people you could follow and learn from. I mean, there's so many great books. I have a pile of books sitting by my desk, by the way, that I haven't yet gotten to because I've met so many amazing authors. But look on, follow people on LinkedIn that post something that sparks your interest. And I'm not going to give you a whole list of names, but a few people that I ended up following. I mentioned Lily Zhang already. There's a woman who's a professor who I saw posting about neurodiversity, and that was one of the areas where I felt like I didn't have enough knowledge. Her name is Ludmila Praslova, and she's on LinkedIn a lot, and she posts about neurodivergence. And she's interesting because she is a professor of psychology, I believe, and leadership, and she's also autistic. And so she writes from that perspective, and I have learned so much from her. So I think she's a very interesting person to follow. I also have met and follow the work of Karen Catlin. Karen Catlin was formerly of Macromedia, and then she became an author and speaker and consultant. Her book is called Better Allies. She has several books based on that, and it really helps you to be an ally to everyone. And I think that's a great person to follow. She has a really good newsletter that comes out every week. So those are a few ideas, but see who's interesting to you. And I said I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn because I feel like I learn from people a lot. I connect with people, and I would encourage you all to do that as well, because there's amazing content out there and there are amazing people. It takes a little bit of time, but I try to spend at least a little bit of time every day because it will expand your world and your mind and your heart.
Yeah, and to filter as well there as well, right? There's also so much stuff
Yes.
that's needed, but yeah. Well, Minette, hey, it's a real pleasure. Like I've had thanks for this. I've learned a lot from you. I will continue. I still have to finish your book, but I thank you so much you being here today. I hope you can return in the future. I hope you continue learning. I hope you continue writing those books, and I can just say thank you so much. So
Thank you for having me. Were there any other questions that we didn't get to from the audience?
no, I've been reading. I've been following. I'm checking here. No, there hasn't been any others. Let me just give it a last look here. There's no, there are. I don't think there are any more questions. So thanks for your time.
Thank you.
And I hope to see you soon next time I'm in California.
Yes, definitely.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks,
Thanks. Bye, everybody.